What's going on, Packer fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. I am really excited today to be talking with the one and only Will McFadden. He is a writer for the Falcoholic. You can find him on the host of the Bleav in Falcons podcast on the Bleav Network. You can follow him on Twitter at Will McFadden. You can follow the Bleav Network at Bleav Network. Interestingly enough, Will, it is amazing to be chatting with you today about your Atlanta Falcons. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andy. I'm really excited to talk to you about this matchup as well.
Yeah, so where I wanted to kind of start, and before we kind of jump right into Packers, Falcons, I feel like there were so many teams that were in that we have no idea what they're going to be. And I think Green Bay is one of those teams. I think Atlanta is one of those teams. They both got victories, but even then you get victories of like, but who are Chicago? Are they any good? Who is Carolina? Are they any good? So you're still kind of in the same sort of, place that you were, probably a little bit better knowing that you got the win. But overall, I wanted to see, before you got that win over the Carolina Panthers, what were your sort of expectations for this Falcons team going into the season, even prior to that win?
I think here in Atlanta, a lot of people's expectation was, all right, this is year 3. And at the beginning of Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot taking over, we knew financially that this offseason was going to be the area where you got some relief. And so this was always circled as kind of the year when everything should come together. And at that point, when they started on this journey in 2021, we thought Matt Ryan may still be around. But yeah, like a lot of things have changed. Julio Jones is gone. Calvin Ridley is doing amazing things in Jacksonville. So This is an entirely different team. And the expectation is playoffs. You opened talking about how there is this big logjam, especially in the NFC, of these teams that you don't really know what to make of because all of the guys that you used to know are no longer there. And especially quarterbacks. I mean, that has totally changed in this conference. But playoffs are the expectation for the Falcons in the NFC South, especially. And then I think, as the season rolls along, people are talking themselves into, all right, get into the dance and then win one game. Like, let's see you do something, because Tennessee was always really frisky in the playoffs. They were always that team where it's like, Baltimore's the 1 seed. They're going into Baltimore. Oh my gosh, they knocked off Lamar Jackson, MVP. Like all of that stuff does carry to the playoffs. And so I think as you're seeing Arthur Smith build a little bit of an NFC version of some of that Tennessee toughness, this is a totally different kind of like stylized team, I feel like. But the heart of this unit is still that Tennessee run the ball, grind you down, be physical in the trenches, and make you feel like you played an NFL game when you come out of it. So far, I mean, 1-0, that's a great place to start. They haven't been 1-0 since 2017 when I started covering the Atlanta Falcons. So it's been a long, long time. And it's nice to be here.
Yeah, it's been a hot second, certainly, since they've been in that position. Sort of a similar question. There's, as much as there's this logjam of teams, and especially in the NFC of unknowns, it's the same thing at quarterback. And once again, Jordan Love and Desmond Ridder sort of in that same conversation of, it's just like, what do you expect going in? What are we going to see? What are we going to get? So your thoughts kind of going into the season with Desmond Ridder, and then we'll kind of transition into his play against the Carolina Panthers and what you saw to him in week 1.
Yeah, I actually think that if you look at the two style of play of the two quarterbacks in this game, Jordan Love and Desmond Ridder, not dissimilar. I mean, they straight line throwers, and that's what Ryan Tannehill was in Tennessee. Like Arthur Smith has a type, not only at wide receiver, he likes big wide receivers, but he likes, guys who throw it on a rope. And when you miss without a lot of touch, you're going to miss badly. And I think that was my main concern with Desmond Ridder heading into this season. Is you saw it at Cincinnati when he was off target, it was pretty egregious. He was off target, but that also speaks into why the Falcons have guys like Kyle Pitts and Drake London and Matt Collins here. These big catch radius targets. And there was a play against Carolina where it was probably the biggest play that Desmond Ridder made, unless I'm forgetting something that he kind of did with his legs, which he can also do and is a factor of his game that I really like. And I think we will see on display against a Green Bay. But he put the ball up for Kyle Pitts, kind of in double coverage down the field, but Kyle Pitts made a great play. You put it in position for him to use his length, his basketball skills, and he makes a big catch down the field. The Falcons need to see more of that this year. I think it was encouraging that Desmond Ridder made that play in particular. He was 15 of 18. I mean, the efficiency was there, but now you're just asking him to continue to grow in this offense. And that's all that he has to be this year, is really just that game manager. They won by 2 touchdowns on a day when he threw for 115 yards. Like, that is proof of concept. And I think that he could get to where Jordan Love is now, you know, maybe by next year, because that's kind of the timeline they're on.
Sure.
But I really liked what I saw from Jordan Love in Green Bay's season opener. I think that Desmond Ridder, like, that is the, if we're gonna, you know, apologies for nerding out here for one sec. My childhood Pokemon was like the huge thing. If Desmond Ridder is like the starter Pokemon, Jordan Love is probably that like second evolution. Neither of them are like the third evolution yet, but that's kind of where he is, I think, in his development.
Let me just pause and say, A, you can nerd out as much as you want on this show. This is a 365-day-a-year Packers podcast. We're all nerding out in some capacity. The second thing is that it is like very interesting to hear at any point in time. Like, this is the first time I think I've ever heard anyone say, like, we're hoping our quarterback can like upgrade into being Jordan Love. Like, that's just like it's just such a weird concept right now. So that is amazing to hear. But no, I totally agree with you. Was there a penalty call on that Kyle Pitts play as well? Did they call pass interference on that, or did he just go up and get it? And I know he caught it. I know he caught it.
Yeah, no, I don't think they.
Okay.
I can't remember if it was. I mean, obviously it was on the defense, but
yes,
he made such a cool like swim move over the defender to then make the catch that it was bang bang. They didn't throw a flag on Kyle Pitts, and that's all I care about.
No, I knew that. Yeah, it was interesting because I'm going through and I'm watching the tape of it, and I'm obviously watching the all 22, so I'm not hearing the announcers and what they call it, whatever. And I see the contact at the point of attack on the defender, and I'm just like, oh, that's going to be a pass interference, and I kind of skip to the next play, and then at the very end, I'm like, wait, did he catch that? And then we replayed it back, and I'm like, oh, he did catch it. And I'm like, wow, that's like just a great play from Kyle Pitts. And yeah, you know, Ridder put it right where he could go up and get it. When you've got guys like Matt Collins, like Kyle Pitts, like Drake London, they're made up on the outside to have, like you said, that big, you know, wide radius, but they've also got those shifty guys. And, you know, obviously Bijan Robinson too, that can do some of that work. And we'll start kind of going now into that game. And I just want to know your sort of key takeaways, what you saw from the Falcons. You mentioned, you know, 2 touchdown victory. Ridder didn't have to do a ton, but what was, other than Jesse Bates having a phenomenal freaking game in his first game coming over from Cincinnati, what were your key takeaways from that game?
Yeah, I know we'll get to Jesse Bates in a second, so I'll put him aside for right now. But I mean, the short answer is that he was the reason they won that game.
Yeah.
But I really think that I would chalk this win up to the coaches and exactly what your first question was. You know, what are the expectations for this team? Where have they come the last 2 years since Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot, you know, took over? And I really think that the Falcons, they have said from day one, like, we want to compete both now and in the future. I have to believe from day one, the coaching staff was like, we're trying to reach the playoffs from the jump, and they have been coaching that way. And one of the things that I have seen that has been a huge departure from the previous regime, and I have all the respect in the world for Dan Quinn. I mean, obviously what he's doing in Dallas speaks for itself, but they change things game to game, have very tailored game plans. For Atlanta under Dan Quinn, it was very much about what we do well. We're playing cover 3. We're running this kind of Shanahan style offense. And that's what we do. And if you know it's coming, great, but we're going to beat you, even if you know it's coming. The Falcons take a little bit of a different approach. They are changing constantly. I mean, we see it on offense, but defensively this year, you're going to see a lot of this multiple defense, very changing in the secondary, the fronts. Jesse Bates is a big part of that. But I think the adjustments that the coaching staff was able to make from the first half to the second half, and every team makes adjustments, and, you know, to some degree, they're all overblown. But the way Brian Burns was impacting the game for Carolina in the first half, and the fact that, I mean, the crowd was kind of like, is this the team that we've been so excited about all offseason? Sure. Like, it was reaching that point. The biggest secret weapon for the Falcons is that they have Younghoe Koo. So sometimes you can't tell if Boo Birds are out or if Koo Birds are out. So for right now, at least, I'll say that those were Koo Birds. But going into halftime, it may have been some Boo Birds in there as well. So I think the adjustments they made to then be able to emerge again with a 2-touchdown victory, they kind of shut Carolina out in the second half. That to me is the biggest takeaway from week 1. And it is the result of, I think, the 2 years that have got them here. All of this work that the coaching staff has done, the real live reps of getting ready to play a Buffalo or to play, you know, a Tennessee or these good teams, but keep it close. The Falcons have been doing a very good job of that the last couple of years. Now that they've got, hopefully, the dudes to be able to win some of these games, that's where the expectations come in. But at least in week one, I was very confident that the coaching staff was able to kind of dial everything in correctly to then still emerge with a victory, when for a half there, it looked like, all right, maybe you're going to start 0-1 again. As far as players, it's just hard to tell. Like, the running backs touch the ball 70% of the time for this offense. That is not going to be the Falcons' recipe for success moving forward. So we don't really know what this offense looks like when they do throw the ball 25 times. You know, what does Drake London look like when he is really getting involved? Because he wasn't involved at all in week one. What does Kyle Pitts look like when he has 9 targets? You know, is it otherworldly? Is it 156 yards and 2 touchdowns? Or is it like 6 catches for 35 yards? That is stuff that we are still trying to figure out with this team. But I do trust that game in and game out, the coaching staff is going to put this group in a great chance for success. And then from there, it's up to the players.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of parallels here with Atlanta and Green Bay again. I think you mentioned the different offenses that they're going to be able to throw out there. I think Green Bay, like, it would not surprise me if we saw 2 totally different offenses from both of these teams than what we saw in week one, because they are so multiple. Both of them put a ton of stuff on tape, and now they could easily just go in a totally different direction in week 2 and just be like, surprise, we're not even doing any of the stuff that we did a week ago. And I think both of these coaches have that, you know, in their wheelhouse to be able to do. And then the other thing that you mentioned is these are 2 younger teams, and at halftime, neither team was like really dominating or anything. And it was going to be hard. How did they make the adjustments? Could they go and get a win in the second half? And both these teams end up winning by double-digit scores in the second half and really put a fantastic performance together in the second half of their game. So I think that's what kind of makes this game so incredibly fun, is you do have still these kind of 2 unknown teams. They're both 1-0. They both have, I think, legitimate playoff aspirations. Both of these teams could go, I think, in any direction from this point forward. And there's a real legitimate world in which the number 7 seed, maybe number 6, 7 seed in the NFC comes down to Packers or Falcons. I think there's a real chance where that could be the case. So I think that there's so many layers and levels to this that make this game so incredibly fun. I did want to go back for just a moment, though, to that addition of Jesse Bates, because sometimes you spend that big free agent money on a player and they come in and it's just like, this is what we paid for. Like, this is it. And, or maybe they get the contract and then maybe they're not quite as motivated. Man, he totally changed that game on its head. I talked about this with Mike Wall yesterday, but that first interception that he has, and it was a little bit of Bryce Young kind of staring down his receiver and not checking to the left side to keep the safety honest and a little bit. They're playing a really fun coverage on that play, but you've got the 2 seams. I think if Young just looks left a little bit, Bates has to stay, but Bates, being the veteran that he is, this is just the classic. It's a rookie quarterback versus a veteran safety. The veteran safety just eats his lunch on the play, jumps the route. If you look at it from Bryce Young's angle, it looks like he's going to have, I think it was the tight end or whoever it was coming across, against the wide or against the linebacker. He throws it and Bates just chef kiss perfect. So he made such a huge impact, forced a fumble, had another interception after that. He's clearly going to be a player for the Falcons that they're going to want to give him those opportunities to make those plays, and that Jordan Love and Green Bay's offense is going to have to avoid.
Yeah, I'm very, very interested, that dynamic right there at the end, Jordan Love and Jesse Bates. You know, how does that play out? Because Bryce Young was making his first start in his very first season. Jordan Love, still, you know, first time full starter, not his first season. So he does have a little bit of that experience of at least watching Aaron Rodgers and learning and being in those meeting rooms and seeing. But doing is a little bit of a different animal. And Jesse Bates has been doing this for a long time and at a very high level. And I think people forget, because when we look at this class, this free agency class, apologies for Atlanta, when we look at this class, people like to start with, all right, Calais Campbell, awesome. You know, Jeff Okudah, that's great, even though he wasn't a free agent. But, David Onyemata, Caden Ellis. We forget that Jesse Bates was the crown jewel of this free agency class for Atlanta. It just so happens that he was kind of the first move they made. And that move was made in the peak of kind of the Lamar Jackson sweepstakes. Like, so everybody was just kind of focused on Lamar Jackson. And then it was, and they spent a ton of money on a safety. That's kind of not what we expected the Falcons to do. And me personally, knowing Ryan Nielsen was coming over, I was looking at CJ Gardner-Johnson. I thought that type of physicality, adding a player like that is more where they would go. Instead, they went cerebral. They went versatile. They went somebody who is truly a playmaker, but like a very smart playmaker. And I wouldn't be surprised, his last name is Bates for a reason, if he baited Bryce Young into one or, both of those mistakes. Although the second one just looked truly like, just a bad decision on the quarterback's part. That first one, even if Bryce Young had been looking right at Jesse Bates, does he still kind of say, I know what you're doing. I know where you're going. Like, I'm still making this jump. Who knows? But he was the reason Atlanta won this game. I mean, his turnovers led to pretty much all of Atlanta's points. And then that forced fumble at the end was a key play in the game. At one point, I mean, to just speak to how much Atlanta's offense struggled at times and how much they needed Jesse Bates, because their defense was kind of bend but don't break, and Jesse Bates was the reason it didn't break. They had one play after one of Jesse Bates's interceptions where I think they went backwards on the drive, and then Younghoe Koo had to make just like a long 49-yard field goal to kind of salvage any points on it. That was pretty much the indicative of the entire day for Atlanta. It was like, all right, great play defensively. We can cash it in for pennies on the dollar offensively, but that's enough against this Carolina team. So this will be a different beast, especially if Aaron Jones is in, because I think that he could draw a lot of attention from the safeties, just in the way at both backs, honestly, but just specifically the way they like to use Aaron Jones in the flat as kind of that quick receiver, and in on those K routes that he did and scored that awesome touchdown pass on. Like that would be my biggest concern in terms of how Jesse Bates, like if he is shadowing your running backs, like maybe he's less impactful down the field, but he is going to be a huge part of this game. And I mean, I think it's safe to say he's easily a top 3 defender. Grady, AJ, and Jesse Bates at this point for Atlanta. I mean, I think those are the trio of guys if you're talking about top level defenders for this unit.
Yeah, totally agreed. I'll ask this question because it's one that we've kind of thrown around in Green Bay. It was like, all right, was Green Bay good or was Chicago just really bad? So as you kind of watched everything back on that tape and kind of reviewed it through the week, did you get a feel for, was that Atlanta good or was that Carolina bad? And usually it's probably somewhere in the middle, right?
It's so hard to figure that out after 1 week. Right? I know. It's just one sample size. So it's like, how do you compare? I want to answer for Green Bay, which is not what you asked first. I think Green Bay looked really, really good. I did too. Personally, me going back and watching that tape, like it's the trenches, right? And that's where Atlanta wants to play. And I thought that you felt Green Bay really come through with their defensive line and with their offensive line. And in that way, like I think they played much better than Atlanta did in the trenches, which is what scares me a little bit about this week's matchup. Carolina, we know, is for a little bit there in this offseason, we're kind of in that mix of this logjam group of teams, right? Yep. And you look at the NFC, it seems like the Bucks and the Saints were taking the escalator down. The Falcons and the Panthers were riding that escalator up, and maybe there was going to be a changing of the guard. I think the preseason dampened a lot of that for Carolina. I think that is a team that is still trying to find its identity offensively, but defensively, they've known what their identity is for a long time, and it is that defensive line. Yeah. And I thought that Brian Burns obviously played really well. Derek Brown played really well. In that sense, it prepared Atlanta for what is going to be a really tough slate of defensive fronts here to start the season. I mean, they've got Detroit after y'all, and then Jacksonville. I mean, those are four pretty good defensive lines to start the year off with. But I think this was a little bit of Atlanta played a pretty poor game, but it played the right way to win this game. And again, that is why I keep going back to the coaching staff and to the efficiency of the players. I think they recognized the game that they were in and said, all right, like this is our avenue to beat them. Whether or not I think they can now go toe to toe with anybody in the league. I think we only saw one aspect of this Atlanta offense kind of by necessity because the other aspects weren't really working well. It's just really tough to tell whether that was Carolina playing well and that they're a good team taking that stuff away, or if Atlanta just wasn't clicking because it's the first week of the season and they only played one drive in the preseason. So I know I'm not giving you a great answer to this question because it is just kind of hard. I think Carolina can be a good team. The aspects where they are a good team, they certainly were on Sunday. And I do think it's notable that the Falcons still managed to mitigate that strength for Carolina and then overcome it. But Green Bay strengths shone through much more clearly. They looked like the more complete team that was executing its game plan to me than the Falcons did on their end.
I agree with that wholeheartedly and entirely. I think what's really interesting to me, and as we start kind of transitioning to the matchup this week, is I think just the Bijan Robinsons, the Jesse Bates, the Grady Jarrett's, the AJ Terrells, like you could just see the impact that those guys were making on this game. If you don't have Aaron Jones, and we're recording this prior to getting the final injury report on Friday, but if you don't have Aaron Jones, if you don't have Christian Watson, just some of that playmaking is gone a little bit. It's not like we saw against Chicago, some other guys are certainly capable of stepping up and making plays as well, but that does take away a big chunk of that. And I think Atlanta's big time playmakers could be the difference in this game. And I think that's going to be what Green Bay ultimately has to limit. What are your kind of key matchups that you're kind of keeping an eye on for this game?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's going to start with Atlanta's tackles against, Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, like that. Rashawn Gary was so impressive, even in a limited
12
role
snaps,
against Chicago. Yeah, and he had like 5 pressures.
The PFF had him at 5. Matt LaFleur said they had him at 7, and he only had 10 pass rush snaps. So either way, a fairly decent day.
Yeah. So, and you're talking about a game in which it seemed like Brian Burns had 1.5 sacks in 3 plays, for Carolina. So that right there is kind of my biggest area of concern, because the quickest way to just wreck a game is totally not allow the offense to even get going. And then you had Kenny Clark in the middle, although I feel better about Atlanta's interior offensive line, even though they have the rookie Matthew Bergeron. I think Drew Dahlman is a pretty underrated center. And then obviously we all know Chris Lindstrom, but I'll start there kind of on the exterior for the Falcons offensive line. And then, I really do think that Jair Alexander and Drake London could be a microcosm of this entire game, because Drake London is the type of receiver who would I be shocked, even knowing how good Jair Alexander is, if Drake London has 7 catches for like 82 yards and 1 touchdown? No, because I think the type of game that he plays, if he gets downfield, if he boxes him out, if he runs a lot of these dig routes and does get a little bit of separation and makes a contested catch, like that is his game. However, I also know Jair Alexander is one of the most aggressive, physical, competitive cover corners in the league. And I could totally see a situation where Drake London has 5 targets and 1 catch for 6 yards. And whichever way that goes, I kind of feel like will be indicative of the entire game. So that is a key matchup that I'm going to have my eye on as well. And then offensively, I really think that you could see Jaden Reed versus D. Alford being a very, very fun matchup for this team. Sure. D. Alford is a former CFL player who Atlanta grabbed last year and was in a limited role, but he played really well when he was in there. And then they obviously brought in Mike Hughes this offseason, and a lot of people thought, okay, former high draft pick, he's going to come in and fill the slot corner role that Isaiah Oliver used to fill for Atlanta. And D. Alford flat out just kind of beat him out in camp. And he played extremely well all preseason long. He had a punt return for a touchdown. And so that kind of also helped him in that facet, because the Falcons love guys who can play special teams, who are also, big contributors offensively and defensively. So given if Christian Watson's out, I love what Jaden Reed brings to this Packers offense. That'll be a very fun matchup to watch, kind of as those two guys who are lesser known but have big potential. Whichever one of those guys can make plays, that'll be a very fun matchup to watch.
That's a really fun one. And if, in fact, Jones and Watson can't go, and again, we don't know for sure at this point, but if they can't, Green Bay needs those playmakers to step up. And we saw in week 1 that Jaden Reed has that potential. I think he has even far more potential than what he showed on week 1. We saw a little bit of it on the punt return as well. And I think that matchup could go a very long way in defining it. And I think the other thing you mentioned with Drake London, like I'm interested to see, do they kind of match Jair like they did last week with DJ Moore, because Drake's a little bit more of a bigger, more physical receiver? And obviously Hollins is on the other side as well. Do they just say, hey, we're just going to line up Jair on the left, Rasul on the right, and whatever they want to do, because Rasul can match up his, like, I'm almost more worried about that, because Drake's such a good route runner that I think, and that can be what Rasul struggles with from time to time. It's like, I want to see Jair more on Drake, but it'll be interesting to see how they kind of match up the corners with the wide receivers in that game. And then be interesting too, to see if, do they trust Jair on Drake? Do they feel like Rasul can just shut down Mac Hollins? Do they then, bracket Kyle Pitts a little bit more? There's so many really fun variables that are going to go into this that I'm sure are going to change through the course of the game as adjustments get made. And then I think Green Bay just has to tackle better than they did against Chicago last week. We saw Bijan Robinson on the little swing pass that probably should have been a 5-yard loss for mortal men. But Bijan is not a mortal man. And he makes a guy miss and then splits 2 defenders and takes it for a touchdown. So he, just getting him to the ground, I think is going to be a heck of a challenge in and of itself. And like I said, Green Bay's had their own tackling issues. And I want to ask you about this as well. I thought Tyler Algier looked awesome in that game. And now Cordero Patterson potentially playing in this game as well. I'll say as like a coming from a Packers standpoint, as much as I love Algier, and I think Cordero Patterson has hurt the Packers on numerous occasions in the past, it does feel like, hey, anytime you want to take that number 7 off the field and bring anyone else in, that's totally fine, and we are cool with that. So I'm going to be interested to see like how that plays out through the course of the season. Obviously, you don't want to give Bijan too much wear and tear, but he is so freaking dynamic that anytime he's on the sidelines, you're kind of rejoicing a little bit.
He really is, and they are, it's one game again, so don't want to draw too much off of a small sample size, but it does seem that having Tyler Algier still present is a huge luxury. Obviously, he broke the Falcons' rookie rushing record as a late round pick, and it's only his 2nd year. So, you're just kind of adding strength on strength, which is what the Falcons said they wanted to do when they came here. Terry Fonda was like, "Look, we're going to just add dudes where we already got dudes. Like, that's what's wrong with that." I think that unlike the kind of Christian McCaffrey model or the Alvin Kamara model, where it was just like we're going to run these guys into the ground as rookies, the Falcons do seem to be, at least in game 1, taking a little bit more of a judicious approach with how they're using Bijan Robinson. I would not be shocked at all if we see most games this season with a similar box score kind of ratio wise to what we saw in week 1, which is Tyler Algier is actually probably your leading rusher on the ground in terms of overall carries, maybe not overall yards, because Bijan is the more explosive player. And there were a number of times in this game where it looked like, man, if he makes one more guy miss or stays up for a half second longer, like he's gone for 55 yards. And there were 3 of those plays that almost happened. So you have to believe that that's right around the corner. But Tyler Algier was actually the player who really provided a spark for the Falcons offensively early in this game. I mean, he had, I think, a run of like 12 yards and then another run of like 17 yards back to back. And that was the first time the Falcons had really moved the ball. So this is truly a 1-2 punch. And I think that the Falcons, what I've been saying all offseason, and personally, I'm very curious to see if this comes to fruition, because I'm just out here speculating like everybody else. I don't actually know what's going to happen, but I kind of feel like Bijan is going to be in a Deebo Samuel role a little bit more, where it is going to be a mixture of passing and running. I mean, he had 6 targets, caught 6 passes in the season opener. So I really do think you're going to see both guys on the field at the same time. You could see somebody motion out to the slot or in from the slot into the backfield. You could see both guys in the backfield together. I mean, the possibilities for this are kind of endless. You guys know pretty well in Green Bay, having a little bit of that 1-2 punch with Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon. These are similar types of players archetypally. Bijan is a little bit more of that Aaron Jones, and Tyler Algier is a little bit more of your AJ Dillon. But the way that they're using these 2 guys, I do think is different. And Atlanta seems to use them a little bit more in concert with one another, whereas it does seem like Green Bay is taking that traditional model of like, all right, Aaron Jones, you've got 6 plays here, then you're coming out in AJ Dillon, now you've got this series, or coming out of halftime, AJ, let's see what you got, and then we'll there's more of a traditional rotation, I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I do think you're going to see Atlanta utilize all of their backs pretty heavily together and separately and then together again, and it's just going to be crazy fun chaos.
It'll be interesting to watch. And like I said, those running backs are dynamic, and it's going to be a huge key to this game. A couple quick ones, then we'll get you out of here. Anything on the Falcons injury report? Again, we're recording this prior to the final injury report on Friday, but anything that we should be keeping an eye out for who could potentially miss or be in this game for Atlanta?
Yeah, I'll start with who could miss, because it's kind of a new one. Troy Anderson, who didn't sustain an injury, at least noticeably, in the game on Sunday, but then came in to the facility earlier this week and just kind of wasn't feeling right, is what Arthur Smith said. So they've gone ahead and put him in the concussion protocol. He has missed Wednesday and Thursday's practice. We'll see. As you said, the injury reports have not come out yet, but he is starting inside linebacker for the Falcons and somebody they have high hopes for. So if he can't go, it'll probably be Nate Landman or Tay Davis filling in for him. And that's a pretty big step down for Atlanta. No slight to those two guys, but he is the only player I think in real jeopardy, or at least new jeopardy, to miss this game. Jeff Okudah has been limited in practice the last couple of days. The Falcons talk a lot about their ramping up period, not just rehab, but making sure they're ready to go and contribute in games. And he did talk about, not only the physical conditioning that you need to play 60 to 70 snaps in a game, but also the mental kind of focus that you have to have play in and play out. And sometimes that needs time to ramp up. So that's a long way of saying I'm not sure if Jeff Okudah will be available on Sunday, but he's closer than he has been at any other point. So he could be out there. And then Cordarrelle Patterson has practiced fully the last 2 days. He looks like he is on track to play his first game of the season after missing week 1. So that'll be nice for Atlanta's offense to have another veteran who you've said has given the Packers problems in the past. It'll be nice if they're able to get him back.
Very much. Is he expected to be the primary kick returner, or do they have somebody else in that role if he's back?
He would probably be their primary kick returner. That's still his role. They elevated Godwin Igwebuike. Man, a lot of hard names to pronounce.
You guys do have some fun ones.
Yeah, they really are. So they elevated Godwin before last week's game, which was kind of an indicator because he also can return kicks, that Cordarrelle was going to be out. So they waived him. So I don't foresee that being a case again. If Cordarrelle's back, I expect him to be back returning kicks.
Gotcha. All right. Second to last one. The Falcons will win this game if blank.
Yeah, the Falcons will win this game if Desmond Ridder has 2 touchdown passes. I think he doesn't, again, have to do too much, but whether those come in the red zone and they're 5-yard touchdown passes, or it's, a 40-yard play because they reach that area where teams like take shots and somebody's down there. So I think that you're going to see the Falcons run the ball well because they run the ball well pretty much week in and week out. I think you're going to see the defense keep things frisky because I've come to actually weirdly trust Atlanta's defense to kind of keep their team in games. So this to me will come down to Desmond Ridder in a game where, Bryce Young didn't outduel him, but it was kind of just a draw in a rookie's first start. You got another player who's kind of on the same footing in terms of starting experience. All right, let's see how you do now against Jordan Love. And it is a very tough Packers defense. I think he had an easier challenge last week, ironically, defensively, but it'll be if if Desmond Ridder has 2 touchdown passes, then I think the Falcons will be in pretty good shape to win this game.
No, it makes a ton of sense. I'm so excited for this game for so many different reasons, the multitude of which we talked about today. But last and final one, your final prediction for Sunday's game, Packers-Falcons, who comes out on top?
All week long, I have been saying I think it's going to be close, but I do think the Packers are right to be favored. And I've got this one as kind of like a 26-24 Packers win. I think it'll be close. I think it'll be tight. I think this will be a game that is representative of not just 2 teams that could be fighting for that 6th or 7th spot in the NFC playoffs, but like teams that could be fighting for the division and maybe a 2 or 3 seed in the playoffs. I mean, it's the beginning of the season. We've got a long way to go, but these 2 teams are capable. If we're making a short list of like, what are the teams that look like they could put together one of these 12-5 seasons, the Packers and the Falcons would be pretty high up on that list for me. And I think we're going to see them play like it on Sunday.
And I think the team that wins this certainly in a much better position to do so. Going to 2-0, Packers would follow up with that with a game at home in week 3. So it's going to be really interesting to see this game. I can't wait. I think it's going to be extremely close. This is going to be, I think, a 10-round final. I would be most shocked if either of these teams won by double digits in this one. I think this is going to be a 1-score game coming down to the final minutes. And I think, I mean, it's lame, it's cliche, it's every game, I get it, but like the team that makes less mistakes in this one, for these young teams that are trying to become, like you said, to work their way up to the top of that ladder, the team that makes the fewest mistakes in this one, to me, is easily going to come up out on top. You've got 2 teams that maybe aren't super used to winning a lot of games, who just won their first game, maybe a little bit, high on life after week 1. How do they respond to that in week 2, especially if either of these teams get punched in the mouth early? So really, really intrigued. Will, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time. Tell us where we can find your work and plug anything you're working on.
Yeah. So I actually just wrapped up my first edition of, we're going to call it Bird's Eye View, on the Falcoholic. And this probably doesn't matter to your listener base, but Falcons fans, if you guys are listening, it'll be basically a weekly look at how every team remaining on Atlanta's schedule did the previous week. So I think this first one clocked in at like 2,500 words, and I try to keep it very short for each team, but it's just like best player, best offensive player, best defensive player, like team stat to know from the game, just kind of blurb. So that just came up on the Falcoholic. If you guys want to see what I wrote about the Packers, you can go check that out. And then Bleav in Falcons, new episode just came up with Mike Wall. So we broke down this matchup as well. Sounds like you were on the same wavelength there. And he was great, provided so much information. And then Monday mornings, you guys can also catch my recap of this game with former Falcons fullback Ovi Mahaley. So we will break down Packers Falcons, and you can check out Bleav in Falcons wherever you get your podcast, and follow me on Twitter at Will McFadden. But that's what I got.
Awesome. Fantastic stuff. Give him a follow. Make sure to check out that work. It's always fun reading Packers stuff from, the other side of the mirror. So always fun. And, check out that episode with Mike Wall as well. I know you guys checked it out here yesterday, but I'm sure he provided a ton of amazing detail and content on that podcast as well. So Will, thanks so much. Again, follow him on Twitter at Will McFadden. You can follow me at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.